What do we know about the people who will move? What do they think we need for a good life? Will they come from nearby and speak another language? Will they come from far away and speak our language? When will we become the ones who move? What will we bring with us? How will we greet one another? In the past, what has architecture offered those who move? What could architecture offer them in the future?
I'm very glad to be here and maybe bring a different perspective with some of the insight that we have been working during the last year with the architecture students here at the University of Montreal. And with a master research program, which is called Ville Refuge. So we'll try to give you some coordinates that I hope can be helpful to navigate this very complex reality. So, well, first of all, I would like to explain a bit more the title of the presentation, which is the title also of the master course. And the concept of Ville Refuge is a concept extremely interesting because it refers to a network of municipalities whose aim is to provide access to services and to exiled people taking refuge in the big city. It's a term that was put forward by the intellectual communities at the end of the 80s, and especially by Jacques Derrida. And it's quite interesting because it's referred to a territory of protection for exiled people, and a protection that can happen outside the traditional realities of the state and the nation and the citizenship, where protection takes very long for paperwork, so sometimes involved in a very long process, or definitely very difficult to get. So if we think about the migratory condition, kind of very broad in the terms, and itself is increasingly becoming a way of life, transforming the context of today's cities and architecture. We can feel a kind of uncertainty in the role of architect and in the role of architecture about this moment in history, and also about the role we humans should play. And of course, education and pedagogy should not be behind this conversation. So during this master research program, we encourage students to think of architecture and the design of public spaces well grounded on solidarity, and that can have a positive impact on a community. But of course, no wonder before doing that, we need at the same time to develop new tools to orient ourselves and to navigate in this very complex reality. So in order to find new tools where migration and displacement won't be reduced and flattened into one condition, we try to investigate the role of cartography and the role of graphic notation to understand and visually translate this complex problem. We took as a sort of very important case study, which is the city of Montreal, which is a particularly interesting city for anyone who is examining the spatial distribution of immigrants, since it has an extremely dense diversity. And just to give some data, more than a quarter of the population of Montreal is born outside Canada, and more than 80% of the people that are immigrants to Quebec settled down in Montreal. And among them, of course, we have a variety of conditions, from invisible population to short-term immigrants for seasonal jobs. And quite interesting, in the recent past, 3 neighborhoods became very particularly important as a doorway to enter Montreal and Canada, that you can see here highlighted in red, and which I'm going to refer later on in the presentation. And these neighborhoods are designated as a territory of first arrival, but also territory of passage. For instance, a person lives and goes also along with the socio-economic integration to Montreal. On the one hand, so the residents of these three neighborhoods are very mobile and do not put roots very much. And on the other hand, they embody this interesting double link between the country of origin and the country of arrival, which is Canada. And these territories are defined with a term from also the European Union, which is a territory where happened the process of a chain migration. And here you can find in the glossary of the European Union, which is this term, which is an initial movement of migrants that lead to further movements from the same area of origin to the same area. And it's also very interesting, I think, to mention that in this chain migration system, individual members of a community migrate and then encourage or assist for their movement of migration. And it creates a kind of a global bridge between these three territories and a global condition. And with students, in order to start understanding the complex reality and the complex bridges that are created between different cultures, we started to mapping them in a very traditional way. So with a very traditional urban analysis from GIS and other resources to identify topography, mobility, and so on. But then each student has to travel to a very unstable territories to capture the physical transformation caused by the displacement, and especially the problematic aspect of hospitalities that migrants are living in this neighborhood. So cartography, in our way, became a tool to document the humans, as well as the traces, voices, rhythms, and which are based on their bodies and not only on tangible and traditional urban elements. This also happened through integration into the cartography of observation and other media, and also, of course, the interview with the citizenship and also with the local association. And now I will show you some of the results from this exploration. One of the first actually neighborhood that we studied was Saint-Michel, which is pretty unique in Montreal because of the presence of quarry, which is now used for snow dumping in winter. And when we think about Montreal, we don't quite often think about this aspect, but it's one of the biggest metropolis where it snows the most in the world. And of course, despite the matter of snow falling, there is a constant activities that has to treat snow as a kind of waste, as a material that has to be treated daily in order to leave the city again functional and productive. And the quarry began its activities in the 1925 and was used as a limestone extraction site. And also quite interesting, it was also used to build several of the symbolic building of the city of Montreal that you can see, as, for instance, the Habitat 67. But for more than 30 years now, the quarry has been used, as I said, as now dump, and it's storing nearly the 40% of the snow collected throughout the city. And just to give you some data for the people that are not familiar with Montreal situation, during a storm, it has been calculated that around 200 trucks per hour dump the snow and accumulating during the snow removal operation. So you can visualize the constant noise of trucks and operation that are impacting in the neighborhood, where at the same time there is a large number of immigrants. So we calculate roughly half of the inhabitants of the neighborhoods are immigrants coming for work or for leave in a very low income neighborhood. The students observed and interviewed some of the people living in the district in order to understand how urban planning and architecture inform the culture of hospitality. in one of the main doorways to enter Montreal. And you can see here some of her notation, some of the data, and some of the also interviews she's been doing. And it appears very quickly that the development of this neighborhood produced a very hostile industrial landscape. The presence of the quarry and of the industrial buildings connected to it also produce a series of devices of cameras and surveillance devices that control the neighborhood. And as well, we can find plenty of fences and wires. And of course, in winter, the presence of a constant sound or better noise from the truck. So the neighborhood really reveals a physical and symbolic violence which contribute to dehumanize the migrant condition, where their life take place really in the interstitial spaces between the snow tracks and the industrial parking spaces. So this is the map that you can see entirely here, and is called the cartography of violence, and allowed us to understand the daily life and the daily violence of a migrant life. And it reveals a metamorphosis of the stories that has been told and the metamorphosis of the territories. A second exploration that we've been doing was in another neighborhood of Montreal, which is called Parc Extension, which is for a long time has been the settlement area for the Greek community in Canada, starting after the post-war period. And in the recent year, it has become also transit neighborhood for especially East Asian immigrants. So we find a very diverse population, which speaks neither French nor English at home, but mainly speaks languages such as Greek, Punjabi, and Urdu. And during the fieldwork, it appeared to the students that migrants are locked up in these neighborhoods, and their activities are concentrated mainly in interior spaces, such as supermarket, laundries, religious and cultural spaces. They are confined in their own reality without really knowing or getting in contact with the outside of the neighborhood. And here, for instance, you can see the repetition of the typical Greek board game that create a kind of protective and intimate bubble to the immigrant condition. In this research, the rhythm and gesture of the different migrant condition are observed, and then they are then translated in the maps in order to uncover the rituals of immigrants and also the community that belongs. And it appears immediately that religious and cultural buildings are the safe spaces in which immigrants rediscover their lost identity. And it creates a new infrastructure, an invisible infrastructure in the neighborhood of interior spaces that have become like a second home, where they can speak their mother tongue and practice their costume. Another exploration of the same neighborhood aimed to study this, again, the rituals and the memory of this neighborhood from a collection of images through social media, which are another immaterial infrastructure. And the idea was to collect and to produce collective memory of this neighborhood, to understand which places are the most strongly important for the immigrants and the communities. The students then trace them in the map. So the dots are the places of belongings and the lines are the rhythm created around it. We identified 6 sectors where actually this memorial representation through images became particularly interesting for the students. And she developed also, she integrated some more information studying through videos. And the superposition of these layers of information also attempt to establish a relationship between the place of belonging and the region and the presence that are developed around these places. So this also shows us how the identity of a cartography is changing, and not everything can be represented by Cartesian coordinate. And cartography is no longer as a fixed image, but instead is a temporal moment of the world and a working tool in constant evolution. Trying to propose you a conclusion to this exploration, we try to gently follow the trajectories of immigrants, and we understand something very important, that they are not innocent and passive actors of our map, but instead trigger a sense of co-presence that can break down unjust hierarchies. Instead of reading the city as a singular systems, the cartography suggests that we should more read this neighborhood like a kind of elastic urban ecology that involved in this neighborhood in Montreal and that can incorporate communities with difference and togetherness. And finally here, most important, the list of the group of students and the group of professors that we've been working on for the last 2 years on this beautiful project. Thank you.